Welcome to Military Analytics. Today, 23 May, the Ukrainian armed forces initiated a momentous offensive operation in the region. According to Colonel Sergei Sharavathy, spokesperson for the Ukrainian Eastern Forces Group, the forces have made significant progress, advancing up to 500 meters towards Bakhmut while continuously attacking the flanks of the Russian troops. Notably, the Azov Battalion of Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade played a pivotal role in this advancement. The operation originated in Bakhmut and expanded to the surrounding areas, with a particular focus on the city itself. Russia acknowledged Ukraine's ongoing counterattacks near Bohdanivka and Ivanivka, both located in proximity to Bakhmut. Bohdanivka, situated northwest of Bakhmut, is approximately 5 kilometers away, while Ivanivka lies southwest, separated by about 6 kilometers. The same pattern can be observed in Chusovaya, west of Bakhmut, where Ukrainian military preparations were completed, leading to subsequent action. The Ukrainian army, fully prepared, launched a series of successive attacks on the eastern front lines, employing their specialized forces and artillery units. This offensive campaign involved tanks, artillery, and kamikaze drones, which documented the striking moments unfolding on the battlefield. The Ukrainian armed forces employed various means, including artillery strikes, tanks, unmanned aerial vehicles, and missile systems, to execute their operations. These drones, capturing the most remarkable moments, immortalized the meticulously planned offensive strategies devised by Kiev. International intelligence sources suggest that Ukrainian military frequently utilize drones to record video footage during airstrikes, aiming to shatter the opponent's morale. These videos were then shared on social media after each successful attack, further demoralizing the enemy. Among the series of offensive operations, the Ukrainian forces recently targeted Russian artillery munitions, and a particularly noteworthy moment occurred in the northern direction of Bakhmut. Here, soldiers from Ukraine's 68th Jaeger Brigade deployed an armed drone that released explosives, setting ablaze the entire Russian front line. The explosive impact swiftly engulfed the intricate Russian trench system, captured second by second through the Ukrainian 68th Jaeger Brigade's UAV. Although information regarding the aftermath of the attack was not disclosed, the attack's potency potentially increased due to the presence of Russian forces in the trenches during the detonation. Following this assault, the Ukrainian forces sustained their relentless tempo, continuing operations on the eastern front lines, which progressively extended across the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Another striking offensive operation unfolded, led by the Ukrainian Army's 79th Air Assault Brigade, targeting the Opitne borderline south of Bakhmut. A UAV loaded with explosives glided toward the Russian trenches in the area, unexpectedly displaying the bomb midair. The explosive swiftly impacted the ground, igniting massive flames. The 79th Air Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Air Assault Force released the stunning imagery of this operation. However, the exact unit responsible for the drone attack operation remains uncertain. While the assumption points to the 79th Air Assault Brigade as the broadcasting unit, it is plausible that another Ukrainian military unit executed the operation. Despite the successful offensive operations by the Ukrainian forces, tensions on the front lines escalated rather than subsided. The Ukrainians intensified their attacks in rapid succession, centering their efforts around the Bakhmut front line starting point of the Ukrainian army's grand offensive. The 45th Artillery Brigade shared striking images of an operation conducted amidst the forested lands of Bakhmut, where buildings stood side by side. In these visuals, Ukrainian troops destroyed a Russian artillery and ammunition depot near Bakhmut. Detailed scrutiny of the recorded moments reveals Russian soldiers engaged in artillery activities, seemingly unaware of the impending attack. The 45th Artillery Brigade seized the opportunity, causing disarray among the Russian soldiers, vividly captured by the Ukrainian UAV recording the video. As the Ukrainian forces unleashed their artillery strikes, massive flames and billows of smoke engulfed the area. The lingering smoke persisted long after the attack concluded. Following this astonishing assault in Bakhmut, the 45th Artillery Brigade resumed their operations near the city, targeting the wooded areas close to the initial attack site. It's essential to note that the severity of this subsequent attack by the 45th Artillery Brigade surpassed the preceding one. The imagery distinctly depicts the intensified impact of the artillery ammunition. After locating their targets, the smoke produced by the attack nearly reached the Ukrainian forces' UAV, which faithfully captured these remarkable moments. Furthermore, the 45th Artillery Brigade executed this offensive operation with unwavering precision. The artillery strikes repeatedly targeted Russian warehouses and adjacent military command centers in the area. While the Russian army suffered significant losses due to these relentless operations, the special units of the Ukrainian armed forces continued escalating their offensive measures. This time, Ukraine's 501st Battalion, the Naval Brigade of the Ukrainian Army, spearheaded a striking offensive operation against Russian positions and military resources in the Donetsk region. The recorded imagery reveals the Ukrainian forces launching their attack in a field near the Donetsk region's railway track. The heroic soldiers of the Ukrainian Naval Brigade precisely targeted the trenches established by the Russians in close proximity to the train line, effectively demolishing them. The attack exposed the dispersion of the wooden trenches constructed by the Russian troops. The striking visuals also depicted the Ukrainian Marine Brigade conducting search and reconnaissance activities in the area. Following the assault, Ukrainian Naval Brigade soldiers meticulously combed through the destroyed Russian trenches, making concerted efforts to capture any remaining Russian soldiers. While the number of surrendered Russian soldiers is undisclosed, estimations suggest a platoon of Russian troops surrendered after the impactful attacks by the 501st Battalion. The significance of these successive attacks becomes apparent when considering the overall offensive operations conducted by the Ukrainian armed forces. These recent operations distinguish themselves due to the highly systematic approach adopted by the Ukrainian forces, as evident in the shared videos. If these observations hold true, the Russians face grave danger, especially considering the heightened tensions between Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin in recent days. The calculated actions of the Ukrainian army could yield severe consequences for Russia. The already staggering casualty count of over 200,000 Russian soldiers underscores the magnitude of this situation. If the Ukrainian army persists in their attacks without disrupting the systematic nature of their operations, the losses suffered by the Russian army may reach unprecedented levels. It is well known that when an army's casualties surpass a certain threshold, rendering them infeasible to conceal from the press, high-ranking government officials involved in leading the war in the respective country may be compelled to take action. In the case of Russia, this could manifest as the resignation of the Kremlin administration or the withdrawal of the Russian army from Ukraine, potentially coupled with a substantial increase in casualties. We have come to the most critical moments of chess and throne games in the Eastern European steppes. As you know, with the warming of the weather, the clashes on the front lines of the war between Ukraine and Russia flared up a lot. Both sides are now pursuing strategic moves. But in this regard, the Ukrainian side came out faster than the Russians. The Ukrainian army, led by Vladimir Zelensky, recently launched an incredible offensive operation on the eastern front lines to change the course of the war, with the Russian army targeting the capital, Kiev. The severity of the offensive operations carried out by the Ukrainian armed forces increased considerably. The Ukrainians targeted Bakhmut, the stronghold of the war, as the first stop of their operation. The Ukrainian army is now taking the initiative by attacking on the Donetsk and Luhansk fronts, which it's been on the defensive for a long time. All fronts from Luhansk to Bakhmut and Solder are in Ukrainian fire control, and Ukrainian forces are blockading Russian troops in Bakhmut for a wipeout. The Ukrainian army has repeatedly hit Bakhmut and Luhansk this week, and unidentified attacks in Crimea and Mariupol have targeted key logistics points of the Russian army. Against these attacks, Putin was very angry and reacted harshly. Russian bombers and warships launched hundreds of missiles in and around Kiev to cover the gap of the unskilled Russian ground army. However, the Ukrainian air defense prevented all the damage by shooting down almost all the Russian missiles. This showed that the Russian army had lost its air dominance, that the Russian forces had given all the initiative to the Ukrainian forces, and that they were completely trapped and besieged in Bakhmut, which the Russians considered very important. So how did the Ukrainian forces take the initiative against the Russian army? And how did the Ukrainian Azov-Kraken troops blockade the Russians in Bakhmut? Let's examine the desperate situation of the Russians on the Ukrainian Bakhmut front and the Ukrainian strategies that changed the fate of the war with the latest updates. As oracles, we strive to deliver the most accurate and reliable news around the world to you as quickly as possible. By working hard day and night with our expert staff to support us, don't forget to subscribe and like. The 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, also known as the Azov Regiment, carried out heavy offensive operations in support of the Ukrainian troops on the northern line of Bakhmut in the past few weeks. In this area is the industrial zone of Bakhmut, and in the industrial zone, besides the Russian troops, the mercenaries of the Wagner Group are quite active. However, the Ukrainian armed forces, with the support of the Azov Regiment, broke through the northern line of Bakhmut and managed to advance about 500 meters in this industrial area. After this striking offensive operation, the boss of the Wagner Group made posts confirming the progress of the Ukrainian army in Bakhmut. Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Russian mercenary group Wagner, released a voicemail saying that Ukraine now has the advantage in Bakhmut, but Russia is trying to reinforce it with elite troops to retake the region. But the offensive operation of the Ukrainians continued rapidly, not only in the northern line of Bakhmut, but also in southern parts of the city. While the Kraken special units of the Azov Regiment are supporting the Ukrainian soldiers in the northern line of Bakhmut, the 93rd Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Army is located in the southern line of the city. The special forces of this brigade were breaking through the Russian defense shields on the southern line of the city, while the Azov Battalion continued its operations in the Bakhmut industrial area. As a result of the offensive operations of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade, the Ukrainian forces managed to advance about 1,000 kilometers along the southern front line of Bakhmut. This was also confirmed by Ukrainian official channels. Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Anna Malyar reported that her army advanced 1,000 meters south of Bakhmut, and offensive operations are still continuing. It's unclear whether the Kraken Special Forces of the 93rd Mechanized Brigade and Azov Regiment, which participated in the offensive operations of the Ukrainian forces, are still continuing their mission at the moment. But considering that the clashes continued on the eastern Ukrainian front lines, the Kiev administration probably did not withdraw these special forces from the front line. The Russian side, on the other hand, continues to drive its special paratroopers, the 4th Motor Rifle Brigade, to the Bakhmut front lines in order not to let the Ukrainians change the fate of the war. However, the Ukrainian armed forces placed the Russians under such a clamp and blockade in Bakhmut that it's very difficult to get out of this trap. In other words, the Ukrainian forces have now managed to create a spiderweb-like attack corridor near that currently in Bohdanivka, about 11 kilometers northwest of Bakhmut. Ukrainian troops are prepared and waiting to advance towards Bakhmut. However, as the Russian-Ukrainian clashes still continue in Bohdanivka, it seems that Kiev will keep its troops here for a while. On the other hand, in Kromov, 22 kilometers northwest of Bakhmut, Ukrainian forces continue their operations to hold the entrances and exits to Bakhmut and to seize control of the logistics network in Shasavar, which is 18 kilometers west of the fortress of the war. Ukrainian forces are again trying to provide support to Bakhmut from the full front in Opin, 12 kilometers south of Bakhmut. Ukrainian forces are trying to break through the Russian defensive lines and push Vladimir Putin's troops further into Bakhmut. Interior, about 15 kilometers northeast of Bakhmut, the Ukrainian armed forces launched an incredible counterattack. The Ukrainian armed forces continues to carry out an incredible offensive operation in Soledar with more than 1,000 soldiers and more than 40 tanks. It's reported that Ukrainian forces carried out 26 attacks in Soledar in just 24 hours. This is actually confirmed by Russian official sources. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that the Ukrainian armed forces are trying to repel Ukrainian attacks in a 95-kilometer attack corridor stretching to Soledar. Never in a long time had the Ukrainian army carried out such a systematic and all-out offensive operation. Even Russian leader Vladimir Putin did not expect the sparks ignited in Bakhmut to spread over such wide areas. In addition, while the offensive operations of the Ukrainians that we mentioned were captive to the Russians, the statements of the Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin accepting defeat continued to be reflected in the press. Prigozhin announced that the troops of the 72nd Separate Motor Rifle Brigade of the Russian Regular Army had fled their positions southwest of the destroyed city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk Oblast. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense confirmed that Prigozhin's 72nd Brigade was on the run and reported that they had captured Russian positions west of an important canal adjacent to Bakhmut. In addition, the Wagner leader announced that he wanted reinforcements from the Russian army to prevent the Bakhmut trenches from collapsing within 2 days. The reason for Prigozhin's statements was that the Ukrainians had captured most of the city's high-rise buildings, but the Ukrainian forces had a much more advantageous strategic position than the Wagner troops in Bakhmut. Therefore, Prigozhin announced that he was withdrawing his mercenaries from these areas. In fact, this strategy of the Wagner leader was quite logical because the Ukrainian forces continued to attack heavily, especially on the central fronts of Bakhmut with sniper forces from high-rise buildings. Since the sniper special units of the Ukrainian army seriously attacked the mercenaries of the Wagner group, the Wagner troops were forced to withdraw from Prigozhin in order not to increase the military losses. As you can see, the boss of the Wagner group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, shared all the details of what was going on. Although the Russian administration tried to hide the situation in and around Bakhmut, in fact, this showed us that there was a serious crisis between the Russian administration and the Wagner group. Because if you remember, Prigozhin made heavy criticisms in the past weeks, especially targeting Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Russian Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov. The Wagner leader claimed that his troops were not provided with additional military ammunition and supplies. For this reason, Prigozhin, who attacked Putin and Gerasimov, fiercely prepared the ground for offensive operations for the Ukrainian forces. After this discussion, the Russian authorities had to meet the demands of the Wagner group because Prigozhin threatened Putin and Gerasimov to withdraw Wagner's troops from Bakhmut. But during this crisis environment created by Prigozhin, as we mentioned, the Ukrainians had already completed their preparations for the attack and were waiting for the right moment to start the operations. But will Prigozhin's slowing of the Russian army's offensive speed in Bakhmut go unpunished? Actually, the answer to this question is quite simple. We all know the difficulties Vladimir Putin is currently experiencing in sending troops to the Ukrainian front lines because in recent weeks, Putin has been constantly raising critical issues such as the recruitment of 400,000 additional personnel. This is why the Russian leader seems to have no alternative to the mercenaries of the Wagner group. Therefore, when we look at the current picture, every mistake made by Wagner boss Prigozhin seems to be issues that Putin should ignore. This situation is in the interest of the Ukrainian army. If the friction between the Russian administration and the Wagner group escalates in the coming days, the Ukrainian forces could seize the advantage to a large extent, not only in Bakhmut, but also in Donetsk and Luhansk in general. And if this great offensive operation initiated by the Ukrainians continues to progress successfully, we think that Prigozhin will not need to create a new crisis. The factors that ensure the continuity of the great offensive operations of the Ukrainians are seen as the military aid of the Western countries. Several reinforced detachments made an unexpected attack on the Russian territory and managed to penetrate Russian defenses by up to 10 kilometers. The group managed to take 4 settlements and establish a 35-kilometer squared bridgehead. The morning started with an artillery preparation that targeted Russian forces on the border along a 35-kilometer line. The head of the Belgorod region reported that Ukrainians struck Russian objects in Kazanka Gora, Podol, Grayvarin, Antonivka and Zamoysky. The fact that all these settlements are located on the same highway did not raise suspicions and Russians did not take any preventative actions. After the artillery preparation, a huge column was spotted moving towards the Russian control point, which was heavily assaulted in less than a minute. Judging by the available footage, the assault unit consisted of 2 tanks, 1 armored fighting vehicle, and 9 Humvees. The unit dispersed across multiple facilities located on the Russian control point and started a storming operation. The tanks opened fire at the Russian positions, paved the way for the mobile units, and very quickly broke Russian resistance. Russians reportedly lost several dozen troops before they surrendered. The fighters also reported that in the aftermath of successful storming operations, they captured a Russian armored fighting vehicle, which they promptly drove to the Ukrainian facilities on the other side of the border. But this was only the beginning. For a while, Russian officials did not understand whether the news was fake or not until they were summoned to a meeting. During the meeting, they acknowledged the fact of the penetration and the governor of the region declared a counter-terrorism regime. Interestingly, all troops participating in the operation were Russian residents. The operation was conducted by the Freedom of Russia Legion and Russian Volunteer Cause. While Russian officials had the meeting, The Sultanate was reinforced with additional manpower and immediately assaulted the next two settlements on the line, Kazanka and Glovo. Russian sources reported that if the control center was assaulted by around 50 troops, then after breaking the first point of resistance, the assault unit was reinforced by up to 500 more troops. It is not surprising that the fighters were shortly spotted from a drone past Kazanka and Glovo. The drone footage showed a unit operating north of Kazanka, and a local resident showed another unit arriving already in Grayvarin. This means that unprepared Russian forces retreated and lost control over 3 settlements. The volunteer detachment started facing resistance after already penetrating Russian positions by around 8 kilometers. Several hours later, Russians were seen sending empty buses for the evacuation of people from the nearby settlements. Local residents also noticed engagements of multiple transport and assault helicopters such as Mi-8, Mi-28, and Ka-52. The footage shows how one helicopter automatically discharged false hit targets. This got Russians worried because it implied that the helicopter radar picked up a signal from a Ukrainian air defense. This caused further delays in the reaction, as the birder was less than 25 kilometers away, and an air defense missile could potentially shoot down a Russian helicopter. Later, it was reported that one helicopter, Mi-8, fell down near Prokhorovka. Interestingly, this one was out of reach of Ukrainian air defense, so it was highly likely a malfunction. When Russian forces finally arrived in Grayvarin, the volunteer detachments had almost established full control over the settlement. Local residents did choose to evacuate. Notice that Russians were sending reinforcements. The fighters reported active use of artillery by both sides. Some sources mentioned that there was an explosion on the Russian base with tactical nuclear warheads that is only 4 kilometers away from the contact line. However, all nuclear warheads have been relocated from here a long time ago. Tough fights broke out as local residents reported hearing rounds of gunfire continuously. The attack was also accompanied by drone strikes. The latest strikes reportedly hit the buildings of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and also the Department of the Russian Secret Services. The Russian state media reported that Russian forces made a trap and lured Ukrainians deep into the Russian territory for an easier elimination of the assault detachments. Such an evaluation received a countrywide critique. Thank you for watching us.